To be born a woman of wealth in 19th century America was to inherit a gilded cage. Your life was a script written by men, your father, your husband, the society pages that chronicled your every move. Your value was measured in your dowry, your bloodline, and your ability to maintain the facade of effortless elegance. But for a select few women, widowhood, that most tragic of fates, became an unlikely key. It was the one status that could unlock the cage. When their powerful husbands died, these women were suddenly handed the reins of vast commercial empires, sprawling estates, and fortunes that could bend the economy itself. They were expected to be silent caretakers, to hold the wealth in trust for their sons, and to fade quietly into the background. Instead, they became architects. This is the story of the wealthy widows who looked at the empires they inherited and saw not an endpoint, but a foundation. They defied every expectation, not by seeking the spotlight, but by working from the shadows. They leveraged their social standing, their sharp, educated minds, and their newfound legal authority to build secret dynasties, shaping the nation's culture, economy, and philanthropy in ways that would last for generations, all while the world saw only a grieving woman in black. Today, we examine how these women transformed personal tragedy into unparalleled influence, and how their behind-the-throne power reveals a hidden history of American capitalism. Imagine the shock that rippled through Pittsburgh's smoky, male-dominated clubrooms in the spring of 1889. The body of Henry Phipps, partner to the great Andrew Carnegie, had scarcely been laid to rest when the whispers began. Who would control his massive stake in Carnegie Steel, the most profitable company in the world? The answer was not a rival industrialist, a banker, or a son. It was his widow, Annie Schaefer Phipps. Annie was the picture of a genteel lady of society. But beneath the black crape and the demure demeanor was one of the shrewdest business minds of the Gilded Age. While Carnegie and his other partners assumed she would be a passive shareholder, Annie saw the blueprint they could not. She understood that the real wealth wasn't just in the steel mills, it was in the land, the coke ovens, the railroads, and the untapped value all around them. Quietly, methodically, she began using her dividends to buy up the very infrastructure the steel giant depended on. She didn't seek a seat at the table, she simply bought the table, the room it was in, and the land the building stood on. When the legendary sale of Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan for $480 million created U.S. Steel, Annie Phipps was not just a beneficiary. She was one of its largest and most powerful shareholders. The fortune she built in the shadows didn't just sustain her family, it seeded a philanthropic dynasty that would build libraries, fund medical research, and create foundations that still operate today, a silent monument to a widow's vision. While Annie Phipps was mastering industry in the North, another widow was cultivating a different kind of empire in the sun-baked soil of California. The death of Leland Stanford in 1893 left his widow, Jane Lathrop Stanford, with a crushing burden, a fortune vast enough to build a railroad, a state political machine, and a university that bore their name. But it was also a fortune under siege, by creditors, by rivals, and by a federal government suing the estate for millions. The world saw a frail woman, prone to spiritualism and grief. They did not see the iron will that now had a singular purpose, to protect her husband's legacy, and most importantly, the university they had founded in memory of their only son. For over a decade, Jane Stanford engaged in a lonely, brutal financial and legal war. She liquidated assets, fought the U.S. government in court, and made perilous trips to Washington to lobby politicians personally. She managed the Stanford fortune with a focus that stunned her male advisors, often against their advice. Every decision was weighed against one question: what was best for the university? She didn't just save Stanford University from collapse, she became its sole architect, its fundraiser, its head of planning, and its fiercest protector. She laid the financial and administrative groundwork that allowed it to flourish into the world-renowned institution it is today. Her reign was so absolute that when she was mysteriously poisoned in 1905, a case that remains unsolved, the university lost not just its benefactor, but its CEO. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, the Mrs. Astor, was not a widow who inherited a business. She inherited a name. And in the fluid, brash society of New York, a name was a currency she learned to mint and control. After the death of her husband, William Backhouse Astor Jr., the somewhat reclusive scion of a real estate fortune, Caroline emerged from mourning not as a reclusive heiress, but as a sovereign. She understood that in a democracy with an aristocracy of wealth, power was a performance. She codified the rules of high society with her infamous 400, the list of those who mattered, a number limited by the capacity of her ballroom. With a glance, she could grant legitimacy to new money or banish old families to social oblivion. She built a court where she was the undisputed queen, mediating bloodline disputes and business alliances with the authority of a head of state. Her power was entirely social, and therefore entirely real. An invitation to her annual ball could secure a banking loan, a political appointment, or a suitable marriage for one's children. She wielded her widow's status as a shield of unimpeachable respectability, using it to build a secret government of manners that dictated the flow of capital, culture, and influence in America's richest city for decades. The stories of Annie, Jane, and Caroline reveal a hidden truth of American history. In an era that afforded women little formal power, widowhood was a tragic but potent loophole. These women were expected to be placeholders. Instead, they became master strategists. They built their dynasties not through public conquest, but through private calculation. They used their cultural literacy, their social networks, and a keen understanding of the systems their husbands had created to become more powerful than any of them could have imagined. They built universities that would shape the future, corporations that would define an age, and a social structure that would dictate the rules of American elitism. They were the secret architects of the modern world, and they built it all from the shadows of their grief,